My name is Markus Muller. I'm co-founder and CTO of APIIDA. Let me tell you why I think API security is so important. First, the number of APIs grows exponentially year after year. So we have more and more APIs to secure. We have more and more services to secure. According to Gartner, attacks on APIs will be the most common attack vector. And we're already seeing the first effects on that. If you happen to watch the news on API vulnerabilities, on security breaches, it's quite clear that APIs have replaced websites as the first part of entry. And attacks on APIs are very high risk. So you have a very big attack surface. APIs tend to be very mighty in functionality. You might have some privilege escalation there. So an attack on your APIs, an attack on your API layer does cost you a lot of money. But API security is challenging. APIs are scattered throughout the whole company. Every business unit creates their own APIs. Every product that you use has their own APIs. And that leads to a situation where you might have not one central place for your API, not one central API management solution, but a lot of them. And additionally, all these checks that we do around API security, they tend to be manual checks until now. So there's a lot of best effort involved here. You need these superheroes that go and check the API security, that make sure that also changes to old APIs are secured. And if we look at the goals of API security, well, here we're talking zero trust. We don't trust no one. So everyone that wants to talk to us, every party that is involved in an API transaction needs to be authenticated. We don't trust the payloads either. So we want to introspect every payload, every API request, and we want to make sure that it's a valid and sound request, that it is according to the specifications of that API. And of course, we want to get rid of all these manual checks, of all this manual work. We want to embed it into processes. We want to automate it. But most important, we wanted to make our lives easier. So especially the IT security folks, especially the platform teams, they have enough to worry about day in, day out. We want to make sure that API security isn't one of these things they need to constantly worry. We need to make sure that it's fail-safe because, as I said, the number of APIs is rising. So we have customers at APIIDA that have literally hundreds of APIs, and you have to check all of these. You have to make sure they are secure. So let's look at an example on how API management helps you and how to enforce API security. We have this basic setup for most of the API requests. So starting from the right, we have some service implementations. These might be some backend services, upstream services. There are multiple terms for that, but actually that is where the request is processed. This is where the data is put to use. In front of that, we have an API gateway. So whenever you think about publishing APIs to the internet, make sure you put a gateway in between because it can offload a lot of the checks that you would have to need to build deeply into each of your services, and make sure that you use a tool that was built for that. So don't use something that was built for web applications, for websites. Don't use something that can do it somehow. Use a specialized tool, use an API gateway. And on the left-hand side, of course, we have the consuming application. This is actually the application that issues the call to the API. And we have the user on whose behalf that call is made. So until now, that looks straightforward. And now we're looking at what kind of identities are involved in such a call. We're used to certificates as machine identities. And this is true for the upstream services. This is true for the gateway. All of them have certificates that they use to identify themselves, to authenticate themselves, for example, during the TLS handshakes. On the consuming application, however, we don't have certificates because when we're talking about mobile applications, when we're talking about integration platforms, a lot of the times those can't work with client certificates. So mutual TLS is not an option here. What these consuming applications use instead are API keys that are either transported by the header or in a parameter. And of course, we have the identity of the user. This can be some credentials, some OAuth token that she obtained from an identity provider or a customer identity and access management. So if we introduce this new kind of machine identity, this API key, these need to be managed somehow. And this is a task that's typically carried out within the API gateway itself, within the management platform that is part of that API gateway package if you install it. And that keeps track of all the API keys that is used to create them, to revoke them, to update them, to see their usage. So everything happens inside that gateway. The second functionality of the gateway that we are using is policies. And this is where you define what security measures you want to have applied. So basically, this can be transport level security. This can be application level security. You can add IP filters, IP masks. You can do all of different stuff to the request itself, add something, remove something. You might, for example, want to remove some HTTP headers from the response so that you don't run into the risk of information disclosure. That as well happens inside of the gateway. Now, let's remember that I said most companies use more of one platform, more than one platform, more than one of these API management systems. And this is where things start to get complicated with the management, but also with IT security and governance. So if we add some more gateways to the mix, some different ones, then now you can see that we have like 3 different places where we have to manage our machine identities, where we have to manage our API keys. And we also have 3 different systems in which we have to define our security policies and in which we have to enforce the security policies. And this is a lot of work. Again, it's mostly manual work, and you need to make sure that while these are different systems, all of the APIs, all of these policies adhere to your common set of IT security guidelines. And this situation isn't uncommon, right? So we have a lot of different IT strategies nowadays. We have multi-cloud, we have hybrid strategies. You might have some API gateways that are very specialized, like for IoT appliances or for real-time streaming data. And more of the traditional ones for REST or even for SOAP-based services. And the solution to this is called Federated API Management. So what you do is you extract parts of the management and of the control from the API gateways, from these data planes. So what you have in such a control plane is usually a developer portal where you can manage all of the API keys also in a self-service fashion, and one administration portal where you can configure all of these policies that need to be applied. And this centralized control plane then puts that data into the different federated data planes, and there the policies are enforced, the API keys are checked. But for the management part, for the control part, you now have only one system where you can make these changes, where you need to make these changes. And this is the most convenient solution that there is. Now, the problem is that availability in the marketplace for such a solution is quite poor. In fact, we are one of the very few companies that are in this field and have a ready solution for this. But I think this is absolutely the way to go. And we are supported by this, by the likes of Gartner or all of the other analysts as well that say, okay, federated API management, that's the way to go for the future. So let's check if we have reached our API security goals. Well, we now can authenticate all the parties, right? So we can still use those certificates for where it makes sense. We can now check our API keys across our whole infrastructure, across our whole IT landscape. And of course, we can use our identity providers to authenticate the user. So, all right, that is reached that goal. We can also introspect and check all of the traffic. Because what we can do is we can tell the centralized control plane to validate each request against its spec. And it then makes sure that the data planes are configured accordingly. And as the control plane itself is automatable and has APIs available, we can also embed that into any process we want. So all of our goals are reached. But wait, there's even more. We can put that concept, that architecture to good use, because the control plane now has access to all these management systems. It also has access to the proxies that are generated on them. So what we can now do is we can now scan those generated proxies as well. And that means we can not only check the APIs themselves, we can not only check the API specifications themselves, but we can also check the generated proxies. We can check the security measures as they are applied by the different API management runtimes. And that means no more best effort, no more manual checks. We can go in, we can see if these IT security guidelines are used, are in place, are enforced. And what we also gain is we gain a great deal of observability. Because if we have a consuming application that actually uses APIs from multiple different API management platforms, we now have that one place to put the data together, to aggregate all of the actions of this application, and we gain a lot of insights and we gain a lot of observability. Is it a good citizen? Is it a bad citizen? Do we need to do something about this application? And best of all, we can disable this application right on the spot, and we don't need to dive down into all of these different systems and services. We can just do it within the control plane, and it is immediately locked out of all the underlying systems. And if you get this right, if you get your API management right, if you get your API security right, in the way that we talked about it, in the multi-gateway environment as an automated process, the benefits are huge. You have a much higher efficiency, because instead of multiple places to carry out operations, it's only one place. Instead of multiple places to fetch information that you might need, it's just one place. So just imagine you have to answer the question, what APIs do we currently publish? And then it's just that one place, you go there, you have the answer in seconds. And as the control plane is able to discover the APIs automatically, there are no shadow APIs anymore. There are no orphaned APIs anymore, because you see everything that is running there. We increased security because we baked it right into our pipelines. No more reviews that happen from time to time, but a continuous security scan of all your APIs. And this fast and reliable automation that you have, that really is the basis for all of the things to come. I'd love to chat about all things API management and security. Just contact me on a platform of your liking. Thank you and have a good day.
Still have questions? Turn to Venafi, the machine identity experts. Check out our channel or visit venafi.com to learn about all things encryption, certificate management, and more.